Thank you for stopping by the Someday Life podcast. I am the host, Justin Christensen. Listen, guys, everything that you thought about food might be wrong. I'm not kidding. After you listen to this episode, I guarantee you're going to start thinking inside out and being like, man, have I approached eating incorrectly my whole life. At least that's how I felt after this episode. And I've been implementing what Michelle had talked about in this podcast, and it's been working wonders for me. And it's kind of changed my relationship really with food and how I think about it. I always had like a love-hate relationship with food. Basically been a binge eater, you know. I'm an emotional eater. I think a lot of us are with stress, and if I'm happy, if I'm sad, if I'm mad, whatever, I always find that there's some comfort in food. And then there's discomfort because I gave into the comfort, if that makes any sense. So please join me as Michelle May turns the whole food industry on its head. The dieting stuff, we can throw that out the window after you hear this, I promise you. She specializes in mindful eating programs and training. She is the CEO of amihungry.com. Listen, I'm going to put a link in the show notes. Make sure you check it out after the episode, or check it out now. I really don't care, but it is a retreat that Michelle and her team is putting on, and it will change your life. It will change the way that you think about food. So if a someday thing has been, hey, someday I want to, maybe just change my relationship with food and how I think about it. I always thought, hey, I want to lose 10, 50 pounds or whatever. But Michelle is telling me that that's not the way to do it. I should not be thinking about weight at all, because then I start linking my weight to food. Anyways, I'm giving away the podcast. Let's get to it. Here you go. Michelle May in the house. Give her some love. Give me some love by hitting some subscribe and commenting and rating their podcast. Thanks, guys. Much love. Have a great day. We were talking about mindset a little bit and how my week has been. I've looked at it a lot differently. So what little things do you do that like help you focus on your week and help you on your tasks, and just to where you feel like, okay, I'm in the right place, in my head, and I can conquer the tasks that I want to do? And do you do anything special for that? I mean, is a lot of that food and nutrition?
No, absolutely. I do a lot of things. One is just sort of the overarching concept that I'm living on purpose. And I mean by that I am not just going through the motions, that I am doing this work because it changes people's lives, that I can make a difference for other people if I can stay focused on what's most important. So that overarching mindset makes a huge difference for me. When I start to struggle with it is when I start to view what I'm doing as a series of tasks or things, a to-do list, which I love my to-do list, let's be honest, right? Like I love having a little check off and all that. And it's the only way I can stay organized and get as much done as I do. But if I don't have the attitude that it's serving a purpose, then it becomes a mechanical grind. And I don't want to feel like that. So that's the biggest thing, is the mindset. The other thing is that I don't view my life as being about work. My kids are grown now, so I don't have the responsibility of young children, but I remember that very, very well. Now I have a lot more flexibility in my day, so I know this may not work for everybody, but I really view myself as a whole being, body, mind, heart, and spirit. And I really see my wellness, myself as focusing on my well-being, involving making time to go and move, making time to talk with friends and connect with family members, making time to paint or tend to my succulents, things that are just purely for enjoyment. And I don't see that as a waste of time. I don't put it on the end of the list saying, well, if I have time, then I'll do this. Because when we have that kind of attitude, it never gets done. We never get to it because because you're busy too, that the to-do list is so long. And so I have to put it right up there, prioritize it with everything else that's important in my life, because it is important.
Oh man, that is so well said. I was just like in awe, like, oh,
That's perfect, because I totally agree with that 100%. And I find it, isn't it weird? I don't know. Weird's maybe not the right word to describe it, but why do we struggle doing that on a consistent basis? That's my thing. That's where I get kind of pissed off at myself, is like, why can't I just be in that mindset all the time? You
I
know?
don't think we can do anything all the time. I think what our journey is, Justin, is it's about noticing when we're off track, like going, "Oh, wait, I'm not feeling good, or I'm not sleeping well, or I'm feeling irritable, or I just lashed out at my partner, or I don't want to do this." And as soon as we start noticing that we're not feeling our best, that's not a time to judge ourselves or say, "What is wrong with me? Why can't I keep it together?" That's a time to go, "Okay, what am I doing or not doing to care for myself that is allowing me to feel depleted at this moment?" Because the truth is, we cannot control the things that come to us other than to have a practice of saying no to things that aren't a high priority, to prioritizing everything that comes in and knowing what's most important. But beyond that, things happen
Yeah.
all the time. I had a medical emergency in January, and I just had to make time for it. I had to deal with the things I had to deal with. I had to go to the tests. I had to have the things done. And if I don't remain flexible and able to prioritize what's most important in that moment, then I feel out of control. And you'll hear this when we talk a bit more about food and eating, is that I don't believe control is possible. And I think a lot of times people struggle with vacillating from feeling out of control to trying to control everything, out of control, control everything. And that is an illusion. What we really want to strive for is to be in charge, not in control, but in charge, so that at any moment I notice what's happening. I notice situationally and circumstances. I notice my thoughts, my mindset. I notice how I'm feeling. I notice my physical sensations. I notice what's happening in the moment. And that awareness allows me to make a decision. I may not always make the best decision. It may not always work out the best. But the truth is, I'm doing what I can, which is to take charge of how I respond instead of continuing to react mindlessly.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just kind of thinking about that, how I do that in my own life and when I don't do that. Because I'm kind of a control freak.
Oh, I'm a recovering control freak. I'm not lecturing you, Justin. I'm
No,
speaking
I'm
from
just
personal experience, right? Like it takes one to know one.
yeah, that's one thing I'm grateful that I'm very self-aware. And I
Mm,
think that's just because I'm my biggest critic.
mm,
And so I'm always constantly like not beating myself up, but I'm always like pushing myself like, hey, you could do better. You could have done better at that. Or, you could have been more prepared at this or followed through on that. So I don't know. That's something that I battle with on a daily basis. And
mm.
I love
Well,
how you
it's not a coaching session, Justin, but I think as a recovering perfectionist and control freak myself, what I've discovered is that when I'm really critical of myself and really hard on myself, I can get really stuck. What I
Mhm.
realize now is that self compassion is much more effective. In other words, wow, I don't like the way that turned out. Or, oh, if I had it to do over again, I would have done this differently. And what we can do then is we can take those mistakes and turn them into learning opportunities, turn them into an opportunity to reflect on what didn't go well and why. And if I was in my best place at that moment, here's what I would have done. And what that does then is the next time a similar situation comes up, we have a new chapter that we can draw on to help us respond to that situation.
Yeah, early you were saying like focusing on how you feel. When you and I previously spoke, we kind of talked about this and how it related to like food and stuff. And I kind of indulged on what my relationship is with food. So let's get right into the food side of things, because that's, you know, that is really where I want to go with this, because you are the founder and CEO of IamHungry.com, right?
Am I hungry?
Am I hungry? Am I
I am
hungry?
hungry is a whole different situation.
No, I was just thinking, I've used, since we last spoke, I've used those words just go through my mind constantly when I'm thinking about food. And I'm telling you, it has helped me get control. It really like helps me control and in charge. Yes, yes. So you had told me focus on how you feel, not weight loss.
Yes.
So explain that a little bit.
I really believe this. I think our culture has been waylaid by this message that this is about weight. So there's a number of things to realize about that. First of all, weight is not a behavior. And so therefore it is not under your direction. So we can only focus on behaviors, the choices that we make, the things that we do. And so if we are focusing on weight, we're focusing on behaviors from the past. We're focusing on something that may or may not change in the future. We're not living in the present moment, which is the only moment that we're in charge of. So I don't think that doing things for weight to change your weight is very effective. And here's another reason, because doing things to change your weight means that you have to, on some level, reject your current self, your current being. And you have to decide that the person, the size, the body that you have now is not worthy, is not acceptable. And I don't think that we really engage in self-care behaviors long term when we're doing it to get away from the person that we are now. So if we can accept ourselves in the body that we have now, whatever that is, whatever it feels like, whatever we've been told about it, if we can just accept it right now and then make decisions for how I want to feel now. So it really becomes not about being good, but about feeling good. And in this moment, taking time to move my body, maybe eating a meal even though I'm busy and would rather just work through that time, or maybe recognizing that now I want to eat but my body doesn't need fuel. This is an opportunity to figure out what's really going on and what I'm needing right now. So ultimately, weight distracts us from what's really important, which is self-care.
So you're saying almost like there's a you like when you're, if you're focused on weight, then you're almost kind of tearing yourself down psychologically. And so you're kind of saying, oh, let's say I'm 15 pounds overweight, and I know that. Let's say that I'm a person who the doctor says, okay, you need to lose 15 pounds. Losing 15 pounds would help your lifestyle and just help your, so you don't have any severe medical conditions that come about. What do you usually see with people in those type of situations? I mean, are they beating themselves up?
You've said about 5 things that we have to unpack. Okay. So you want to back up a little bit?
Sure, absolutely.
Let's go there, because this is a tough conversation to have, because I realize that I am swimming upstream at this moment. And the 4 or 5 things you said as examples of that are very, very common beliefs in our culture. So the first is this belief in our culture that you can assess somebody's health by their size. Turns out that's not true at all. I've done a lot of research on this. I speak to medical practitioners about why we should shift from weight to well-being. And the truth is that the results, the data does not show that we can reliably predict somebody's health or risk factors or mortality based on size alone. That some very, very, very thin people are actually much less healthy, that people in the mid-range, actually some of them live longer than people in the normal range. And that the truth is that many people who live in larger bodies are very healthy metabolically. If you look at their lipid panels, if you look at their blood pressure, if you look at their physical activity, their family history, and other factors. So the truth is, weight does not equal health. Now, the other thing you said is that if your doctor says, the truth is, most doctors haven't read this data. They're seeing the same information that the rest of the world is, which is lose weight, be healthy, be healthy. So another thing you said is 15 pounds overweight. And so I want to know, over what weight? Because we as human beings follow a bell curve. Some people, you've known people since high school who were teeny little things, and they are still teeny little things, and they will be teeny little things when they're 80 years old. You've known other people who were always in a bigger body, taller, larger, more muscular, wider, etc. So my point is that this idea that we are also supposed to be a certain size or a certain weight doesn't actually pan out. And the whole system is built on this very flawed BMI, body mass index, that was never created to assess somebody's health. It was invented by a mathematician who was trying to look at populations and see what average size these populations were. And it got stolen and applied to these health conditions. So that's a lot of information. It's actually a lot of misinformation that keeps us focused on, I need to lose weight. Okay, well, let's say everything I said is not true. It is, but let's say it's not. Now your doctor says you need to lose 15 pounds. Well, let's look at the data about weight loss. The truth is that we don't have a reliable way for people to lose weight and keep it off. I mean, losing weight isn't hard. You and I could both invent our own little Justin and Michelle diet right here on air and create a book, and probably could sell 1 million copies if we had the right marketing. The truth is, weight loss is not difficult. What's really challenging is losing weight and keeping it off, because the body doesn't want to lose weight. The body evolved over millennia to protect us when food was scarce. And so when we begin to way undereat or shift our eating in some way, it's possible that our bodies will then begin to implement protective factors. So we feel hungrier, we notice food more, our metabolism shifts so that we store anything that we get. We might find ourselves feeling more tired and wanting to be less active. And all of these things will cause people to lose weight and then bump back up, and sometimes even bump back up higher than where they were before. So we end up in this vicious cycle that I call the eat, repent, repeat cycle, where we're eating, then somehow we decide that what we're doing is bad and wrong, and then we repent for that, and then we can only do it for so long, and for physiological and psychological reasons, we rebound and begin to eat, or even eat more than we were before, and store, and then slowly but surely, we as individuals and us as a society find ourselves creeping up and up and up. So I know that's probably not what you or your listeners wanted to hear, but if you think about what you're actually seeing in the world, instead of the Instagram post about somebody who's so excited about the 15 pounds they lost, where are they in a year, in 2 years? Are they still there, out there showing that? Because what I've seen, and what you've probably seen too, is what the research shows us, which is the vast majority of weight loss plans or programs do not work long term. And so that brings us right back to the beginning, which is that weight is not a behavior, and we can be in charge of our behaviors, and we can choose our behaviors in order to feel good, not to be good or with the intent of changing our body size, but in order to be the most balanced, healthy person that is available to us.
That makes sense. So what? Well, I think a lot of people have always, and of course, I'm a moron when it comes to this. I know some of the basic stuff, but I can tell that I think a majority of Americans and people across the world, they always, I don't know, I've always took it as like being overweight. So having excess fat in your body. I mean, you look at cholesterol issues, insulin issues, heart attack issues, hypertension issues. It's one of the huge factors from what I've seen with COVID and being able to recover from COVID. And so I've always linked like what you eat.
Yeah. You're not wrong. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's not that you're wrong, but what you're quoting here is what's called correlation versus causation. So what we know is that body size is correlated with certain conditions. But let me suggest a few other factors that might explain partially or fully, or a combination of factors that might explain that. One thing is that we know that social determinants of health have a huge impact on people's well-being. And we've seen that a lot with COVID. That's really uncovered a lot of issues that we were able to turn a blind eye to. So social determinants of health. Do you know that somebody's zip code, where they live, is more predictive of somebody's health than their body size? That's just a fact.
Really?
That when you live in certain neighborhoods, the availability of nutritious foods, the availability of safe places to exercise, perhaps the time, whether you're working 2 or 3 jobs to support your family. I mean, there's a lot of issues that we have to look beyond and stop blaming people. Okay, another one. That's a social determinant of health.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a correlation that I think a lot of people don't recognize. You mentioned insulin. Well, people have insulin abnormalities long before they're ever diagnosed with full-on diabetes. Is it possible, and it is it possible that those insulin abnormalities cause weight gain and eventually diabetes? So we then make the mistake of saying, oh, weight gain caused diabetes, when no, it was a triangulation. There was a third factor, or a initial factor, that caused both of those issues. One more example, 2 more examples. People who live in a larger body in our culture face extreme fat phobia. We have so much weight stigma in our culture, and there is lots of research, not just about body sizes, but of all kinds of stigmas, that the stress that it places on us, the stress of going out in public, feeling that you are at risk for being judged or pointed at, or people saying, even the risk of going to a doctor. I hate to say this about my medical colleagues, and I'm not sure whether you mentioned this at the beginning, but I was a family doctor for 16, well, I'm still a family doctor. I just don't treat patients anymore. But I was a doctor for 16 years. And I know that some in my medical community have the same beliefs that you are sharing, that are so prevalent in our culture. And so when an overweight, I'm using air quotes there for those listening to the audio, when an overweight patient comes in, they may not do the same tests. They may not prescribe the same things, for example, for certain conditions, because they just assume they already know what the problem is and they already know what the solution is. So that person may be at higher risk of dying eventually because they didn't get the tests that they needed. One more example. People are often advised to lose weight. We see it in the news, we see it in social media. So there is this, I call it yo-yo dieting, but the real result of diets is weight cycling. People go up and down and up and down and up and down. Weight cycling in and of itself can be associated with certain health problems, certainly with depression and body image issues and other kinds of problems, as well as potentially issues, metabolic issues that could be putting people at more risk. So don't take anything that I'm saying to mean that I don't believe in physical activity and balanced eating and practicing self-care. I believe very much in those things because those are the things that we are in charge of. So rather than saying I'm doing these things to lose 15 pounds, what if we just took one step back and said, I'm doing these things because I feel better when I do. And frankly, the research shows that when I do these things, I am healthier. And in fact, when you look at the weight loss literature, you begin to see improvements in people's health as soon as they start practicing these behaviors, long before there's any change in their weight. And since people will sometimes lose weight on these weight loss studies and they're doing these behaviors, when they gain the weight back, they stop doing them because they think they're doing something wrong. What if we just focused on the behaviors and helped people move toward better lifestyle behaviors, if you want to call it that, or improved well-being and feeling better, without measuring their success by their force of gravity on the planet?
Yeah, it's tough to stay in that lane, because we are slammed with food things.
Yes.
If you just watching TV, you either have insurance commercials or food commercials or beer commercials.
Yes.
And then everything that we celebrate is usually tied around food.
There's nothing wrong with that, Justin, right? Like there's nothing wrong with...
But isn't it kind of like giving an addict drugs? Like if you have a drug addict and you're like, hey, if this makes you happy, then eat this. Like, explain to me a little bit how you say, what were you telling me? Eat what you love what you eat.
Yeah, that's the name of my book series. Well, let's go back to the idea. I get what you're saying about the it's like giving an addict drugs. Well, food is not addictive. And I know, again, you're pushing all kinds of buttons here, Justin. I understand.
Yeah.
Your audience is going, or they're thinking.
This is why you are so great, though, because this is what you're doing is you're trying to re-educate people. Like, hey, listen, we got to just change our mindset on this stuff.
That's right. And I think it's really clear that all that information that you and I are bombarded with every day isn't moving the needle. We are not becoming healthier. We're certainly not becoming smaller, if that was even ever the goal. It's just not working. And so when something doesn't work, you don't do it harder. You step back and say, well, why is this not working? And I'm going to tell you that it's not working because we're misdirecting our attention towards something that isn't really the focus. So I have to go back to the food addiction piece.
Please. Yeah.
And I just published an article on this, and I think it's important. We are addicted to food in so much as we have to have food to survive, right? We have to have food to survive. And I think a lot of times what people experience as feeling addicted is actually what I described to you before, the eat, repent, repeat cycle. When you restrict yourself of eating foods that you love, and ironically, when you restrict yourself of anything, even if you didn't care about it before, now all of a sudden you've put it up on a pedestal. And now what are you having to think about all the time in order to avoid it? That food, whatever it is. And I'm older than you are, Justin. I'm 58. I've lived long enough to remember when carbs were the good foods and fat was the bad food. We've seen a complete reversal of that over the last decade or so. And so that bad food changes depending on the latest expert, depending on the decade. And so we're thinking all the time about what I shouldn't eat. And then doesn't it just keep showing up? Mm-hmm. So eventually, because of some of the changes I mentioned to you before that happen in our brain to keep us from starving, because our body doesn't know better. It doesn't know we're doing this on purpose, right? We start thinking about that food all the time. We start craving that food. We start feeling deprived. We start feeling like, well, this isn't fair and all my friends get to eat it. And oh, when I'm off this diet, then I'll eat it. Now, all of a sudden, we've given something that was just a food a few weeks ago, we've given it all this power. And so now when we finally say, oh, forget it, I'm not doing it anymore. Oh, I'm done with my diet. Or maybe stress and fatigue and hunger all collide and that food happens to be there. Now we start eating it. We feel guilty. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't be doing this. I was doing so good. Oh my gosh, well, it just tastes so, I'm just going to have one. I'm just going to have one. And then I'll spend an extra half hour on the treadmill. And then we're finished. And then we're like, oh my gosh, that was so good. I forgot how much I loved that. I'm going to have one more and I'll spend an extra hour on the treadmill and I'll go back on my diet tomorrow. So you have another one. And then, oh my gosh, I've already blown it. I might as well eat this other thing that I've been missing. And then pretty soon we find ourselves moving from in control to out of control. We binge on these foods that we've been depriving ourselves of. And then we finally think, oh my gosh, see, I must be addicted to the food. It was never the food. It was the power that we gave that food by putting it on the bad list. And when we put something on the air quote bad list, we end up giving it more power than it needs to have over us. So tying all the way back to our initial discussion about how we can manage our lives more effectively, let's stop trying to control everything, including our appetite, and let's be in charge. Let's just make some decisions. The food I was thinking of here was a donut. What was the food you were thinking of the whole time I was
Reese's
talking
Pieces.
Reese's Pieces, right? Everybody has their own food that they're thinking of, the one that they've struggled with. And it's easy to say that we're addicted to that food. I think what we're actually feel addicted to is the process of deprivation and restriction, overeating and binging, going back to deprivation and restriction. And that feels very powerless. So my recommendation for all of us is to stop giving food the power and to be in charge of your choices. If you eat Reese's Pieces, sit down, enjoy them. Don't ruin them with guilt. Don't have a second handful because you are telling yourself you can never eat them again. Just enjoy them and then move on and use the energy that you've consumed to do something you love in your life.
And so you specialize in mindful eating programs and training. Is that how you came up with the "Am I hungry?" Like asking yourself that question?
Yeah.
To kind of just recenter or recalibrate your mind to look at the food differently. Like when you go to eat, because I know this is something that I've struggled with is boredom. You know, I eat when I'm bored because I don't know. I'd rather eat something out of my pantry than grab a drink of water.
Right.
But then after I do it, I realize, I say, damn it, I shouldn't have done that, because then I got excess calories and I know now I used to have this sticky note in my pantry. It said, eat for fuel, not for pleasure. But then,
well, that might be taking it to an extreme.
Yeah, but I'm an extreme person, so I always have to
hear that. I can hear that. And you know, there's this saying that I really love because it described me perfectly. How you do anything is how you do everything. And so you and the reason that I got into this work is because I struggled with yo-yo dieting and disordered eating from the time I was a teenager. So the things that you're talking about, I totally relate to. I didn't start doing this work because I thought I had all the answers. There are a lot of people out there promoting diets and plans who have never struggled with eating in their lives. They just want to tell other people what to do. And I'm just going to tell you that I love this work because I know what a difference it can make in our lives. Because when you're like you and me, struggling with eating when we're bored or stressed or a million other reasons, we think we need to resist. Your example of the note saying eat for fuel, not for pleasure. We think we have to resist this pleasure, and we end up actually fueling the very cycle. Because one of the things a lot of people don't know, I keep going back to research for you.
Please.
But one of the things people don't know is that the research shows us that when you restrict certain foods, it actually becomes a trigger for overeating those foods. And that's based on actual studies that have been done. You can do it in animals, you can do it in humans, but I think most of us have experienced it personally. It gives that food more power. So I don't think there's a problem with eating for pleasure. I think there's not even a problem with emotional eating. We are creatures who are connected to food at a very intimate and fundamental level from the moment we're born. And so using food to add pleasure, to add some comfort, to connect with other people is not only not a problem, it's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
I think that we need to love food more, not less. We need to start really loving and respecting food and appreciating the enjoyment that it brings to our lives. So let's go back to boredom eating. I asked the survey on my Am I Hungry Facebook page. What are your two biggest triggers for eating? And the answer was clearly stress and boredom. Those were the two biggest ones. And there was a whole bunch of other ones, as you could probably, think of them, and we can go down that path as well. But stress and boredom, which is so funny because boredom is not having enough to do, and stress is having too
Too
much to
much
do.
to do.
So food fixes everything, right?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So what we're doing when if you're bored and you're reaching for food, eating is something to do. You're actually solving the problem in that moment.
But it's pleasurable.
It's pleasurable and it gives you something to do. So let's take a step back and say, okay, instead of beating yourself up and I shouldn't have done that and that was bad, I should have had water, which by the way is not that pleasurable. I mean, I like water. I'm always drinking water, but it's not a replacement, right? So the next time you feel like eating, and well, actually, let's stop there. The next time you feel like eating, instead of thinking, oh, I shouldn't, or what am I going to eat, or opening the pantry, think to yourself, am I hungry? Am I hungry? Am I having physical symptoms that my body needs fuel? I think a good analogy here is if you were driving down the road and you saw a gas station, you wouldn't just pull off and fill up. You'd check your fuel gauge first. So when you feel like eating, check your fuel gauge. Is there physical signs of hunger? Is my stomach growling? Is my energy dropping? Am I starting to have difficulty focusing? Am I starting to feel irritable or hangry? Or I won't tell you what my husband calls it, but we're starting to have these sensations. If you're hungry, then make a decision about how hungry you are. Is this a convenient time for me to eat based on how hungry I am? And what am I going to eat? What will I serve my body? So let's leave that question for a moment because that's a whole Pandora's box that we can go to in a minute. But maybe the answer is no, I'm not physically hungry. There is no growling, there's no low energy, there's none of the symptoms that I know my body gives me when my body needs fuel. So what is going on? Okay, in the moment, I'm bored. It's not that I don't have stuff to do. I got a million things on my to-do list, but I'm bored of what I'm doing right now. I don't want to keep replying to emails, or I don't want to keep making these sales calls, or I don't want to keep doing whatever it is that I'm doing. Oh, so I'm bored. I want something to do, but what I really want is something pleasurable to do. So that's why eating something pleasurable has such a strong draw for you, Justin, is because it's meeting that need for something to do that's pleasurable. And once you understand that, then you can say, okay, that's one possibility. And by the way, you could choose that if you wanted to. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean anything. It just means you're making a choice. And what other choices are available to me? What else would be pleasurable? My dog's been nipping at me all day. My dog needs a walk. Let me get outside and get a breath of fresh air. Or, the kids just got home from school, or they're taking a break from virtual school. Let's play for a while. Let's go out and throw a ball for a bit, or play a game, or talk. Or um, my partner just got home. I wonder if they'd like a back rub. We could just go on and on and on, but there are literally thousands of things that we can do when we're bored that will also add pleasure. Food's just one of them. Eating is just one of them. Is this making sense, Justin?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think I go back to, in my mind, I'm thinking of when we first, we talked about evolving, and I think about, let's go back to like the primitive days. Let's go back to how just like the biology of everything, like how our bodies have adapted. Because I feel like when we say eat for pleasure, I don't think that was a thing then, right? It was eating to survive. And then when do you think it transitioned into like, hey, we have excess? Because I think that's our biggest problem as society today. And is that it's so, the pleasure is so readily available. Like, social media, your phone, right? Like everything is this drive-through instant gratification society, and food is almost at the top of that pyramid. And I think
it's a little more complicated. I would bet, and we don't know. I mean, some paleo people think they know. I don't know how they could possibly know this, but my guess is that people have always found eating pleasurable. And here's why I think that. Because some of the things that we do, that we must do biologically, are driven by pleasure. So, or an escape from discomfort. So the two big ones that come to my mind are eating and sex, right?
Yeah.
We have to reproduce in order to survive and to thrive and to move on in the next generation. That's why sex is pleasurable. Otherwise, who would even think of doing that? Like, that doesn't even make sense, right? Similarly, eating provides pleasure as well as removing the discomfort of being hungry. And so I think that we're driven to do things. And a good example of this is that fruit, which, unless you're an anti-carb person, fruit is a sweet, delicious, carbohydrate laden food. And so the fact that we crave sweets doesn't mean that we're bad. It probably means that we evolved to like foods that are high in energy, because in the many, many, many years past, those foods meant you could survive. It meant that you had enough energy to chase down the buffalo that would give you the protein that allowed our frontal lobes to grow to the point that we could later build buildings and go to the moon, right? Like, there are things that evolved and that are still very strong in us. So the craving, the desire for sweets and high fat foods had very likely a biological evolutionary function. Similarly, depriving ourselves of certain foods also triggers those evolutionary processes that say, uh-oh, something's wrong. The buffalo have gone away. The berries have dried up. We better conserve our energy, and we better get really focused on finding food now, or we're going to die, right? Like, those are the things. So you take all that evolution, all that biology, and you bring it into the 21st century, where, as you were talking about, food is readily available for most of us, not for all of us, which is a completely different issue that really we should be spending a lot more time and energy on. And you have these foods that are readily available. Some of them happen to be highly palatable. We enjoy them. They give us that little hit of dopamine that the brain says, oh, this is fantastic, right? Again, evolutionary. Maybe it was, berries one time, and now it's Twinkies or whatever.
That's what I was meaning when I was saying addicted. Like, I feel like we can get addicted to those. So, I mean, is that a thing for real? Like, your brain can get addicted to those, like, to get that dopamine high?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I understand why you're using the word addicted, but having dopamine in our brain simply means pleasure. It doesn't mean addicted. So I'm just careful about using the word addicted where we're talking about food, because the treatment for most addictions is what?
Not doing it.
abstinence, right?
Yeah.
That's how we mostly treat alcohol and drug addiction, is to remove that substance and decrease the dependence on that substance. Well, you can't remove glucose from our diets, or at least it's not a good idea long term, right? It's going to have consequences for us long term. You can't remove food from our diets. And what it actually does when we do is it increases cravings. And again, if you're using an addiction model, you're thinking, well, yeah, that's why, just don't do it. So what ends up happening then is people spend a tremendous amount of time and energy trying to avoid substances that are all around them. And again, if you're using an addiction model, you think, well, yes, of course. But in my work, 21 years of doing this, I have a lot of people that I've worked with who felt very addicted to sugar, for example, or
Yeah.
carbs or other kinds of things. And when we moved away from the restrictive model and we learned how to eat fearlessly, this method that I teach that allows people to re-engage with certain foods, now all of a sudden that food has no power whatsoever. I promise you, in my kitchen 20 feet away is chocolate and other foods that some people might be very fearful of, and I was at one time myself. And so yes, it triggers addiction, but I mean, addiction, excuse me. Yes, it triggers dopamine, but so does sex, so do sunsets, so do music, so do laughing babies. All of these things trigger dopamine. That doesn't mean we're addicted to them. It means that they give us pleasure. So back to your example of boredom, if your only way of getting pleasure in your life is to eat food, then the answer is not to take away the food. The answer is to find more ways to add pleasure to your life and to learn to pause long enough to consider those other options, because food is so readily available. You talked about this, how easy it is to go in the pantry, much harder to go play with the kids or take the break that you really need or all these other things. It's so easy to reach for food. It's understandable that we want to do that because it's so easy and it works temporarily,
Mhm.
but it doesn't work long term. And so when we start to say, oh, okay, well, wait a minute, hang on. Instead of making food my enemy, let me figure out how to expand my options.
So actually add more pleasures, find more
Mhm.
pleasure activities. And some of
Yes.
those could be like a healthier choice, like taking your dog for a walk was a
Yeah,
great
and not
example.
to do it for because it's healthier, but because it feels good and it meets your need for pleasure. And the dogs too, by the way. The
So
dogs are happy too.
so could I argue that with all the outside influence, so marketing and advertising, right, with food, they've created such a huge pleasure for that. Because I can't think of food and sex are probably the two they have to be the two most pleasurable things in the world, right?
For
To
most
some
of us,
people,
yes.
to most of us, right? To a majority of people. Um, I mean, how did we get to this place with like obesity and food and like because I look at all the information that I see, it's telling me, and I'm an insurance agent. I don't know if I told you that. So, life insurance is something that I do, and BMI comes into that, right? Your height and your height and your weight, and medical conditions, family history, and things like that. And so, I just want to know, like, how did we get to this place in society where majority of people are obese? I wouldn't say majority. What is it? What's the statistic on that? About 60%. I did read somewhere like binge eating was a ginormous like eating disorder. Like 2.8 million Americans
Yeah.
suffer from binge eating disorders.
Well,
And
I'll
so I
tell
feel
you
like
what,
it's like
Justin,
people are just like shoving
I'm
this
not a
stuff on
big,
us.
I just because something is very prevalent in a culture, or just because we keep hearing about it, doesn't necessarily make it correct. So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about the word obesity for a minute. That word, it comes from the Latin. Basically, it refers to having eaten until fat. And so embedded in the very definition of that word is this idea that people have done this to themselves. It's their fault and they should pay for it. And similarly, it is based on a BMI cutoff, which was never, it was, you know, insurance, right? There was a time, you're too young to remember this, but there was a time when there were height weight charts that the doctors and the insurance companies used. Those were invented by insurance companies to
They still use
statistically.
those.
Yes, and BMI charts, and
Yeah.
and they are designed to statistically look at a population. What they don't measure is the health of an individual. So no matter what a person's risk looks like in the green, yellow, red of a BMI chart, what about that individual?
Mhm.
What is their lipid profile? What is their blood pressure? What is their family history? Do they smoke? Do they exercise? What's going on for them? So we can't, the BMI cutoffs are based on populations, but we are individuals and we've got to look at us as individuals. The other reason I have a problem with this obesity thing is that it pathologizes and medicalizes bodies. And you go back and you look at art, and if you've ever traveled to Europe and been to any beautiful museums in Italy or France, there were lots of larger bodies. Not, their bodies have always come in different sizes. There's never been one right size body to have. And so this idea that you are automatically unhealthy, or it really just makes body sizes a problem. And I really think that that's a problem, because what that does then is it drives people toward restrictive eating and dieting, which then creates deprivation and cravings, which then may create eating and binging, which then probably for some people may create more weight gain and weight cycling. And so do you see how we've potentially actually created the very problem that people set out to solve? One of the reasons that people are, as a population, getting larger is, number one, that we have such an abundance of our food supply. Number two is we have less and less been sitting down as a family to eat and connecting over food in a positive way. We have more and more been using food in ways that we didn't in the past. I mean, it used to be something we would sit down as a family, but I don't know if you watch Leave It to Beaver, man, she made dessert every night. Like, that was a thing and nobody worried about it back then. So we've really got a bigger issue here, that is not so much that the problem is people's body weight. The problem is that maybe we're just, as a population, we've lost touch with what it really means to relax and sleep and rest and have fun and connect with our families. Instead, we're on our phones, scrolling through social media, looking at pictures of people who are thinner than us, and maybe we're eating the wrong thing and maybe we should change. And, I don't know, this has been an amazing conversation for me, Justin, because you represent, I think, so many of the beliefs in our culture that I think are backfiring.
Yeah.
And I understand that what I'm saying may trigger a lot of resistance in your listeners. But I think if you could step back and just really ask yourself, is what we're doing helping, or is it making it worse? And if it's possible that it's making it worse, could we consider another way to approach this, which we probably should talk about, because mostly what we've talked about is the problem, and we haven't really started to dive into what do we do instead.
Yeah, the solution. That's what I was going to ask, is like, kind of how did we get here? And so, like, why is it, like, what's the solution to this? And I'm pushing back on you, because I'm trying to talk for the masses a little bit of
I love it.
their preconceived ideas of food and what society kind of is today. And I think that gives you a good opportunity to like, let us know what you're doing.
Oh, I love
That's
it. And
what we're here
I
for.
didn't quite finish telling you the story, but I got into this because I had my own, first of all, yo-yo dieting and then disordered eating. And though I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder, I probably had one. And for me, this became about healing my own relationship with food. But I have to tell you, for the first 10 years or so that I was doing this work, I was promoting it for weight management. I didn't know better. I didn't realize that that was part of the problem. But that's become very clear to me over the years, is that what we want to do is focus on the things that we do that help us feel well and whole and vibrant. And we want to focus on those things as individual behaviors. We've talked about a lot of societal issues that I really feel need to be addressed and are important. You've hit on a lot of things that we know are problematic in terms of advertising and the types of foods that are available. We talked about maybe the things that people are not doing to care for themselves. But let's focus on us as individuals. For me, what helped me heal my relationship with food was, number one, to stop dieting, to stop thinking that somebody outside knows more than I do about how to take care of my body. And it really, that realization came to me because when my children were very young, I watched them have this beautiful, joyful, literal connection with food. When they were hungry, they just would eat and they would touch and they would smell and they would play. But when they were done, they were done. I mean, I couldn't force them to eat. It was not something that they were interested in. Similarly, even if they were eating something like a cupcake, once they lost interest in it, once they weren't hungry anymore, it didn't matter. A cupcake could sit on the counter all day long and it would never occur to them to eat it until they actually were hungry. And I realized, my gosh, I couldn't pass up a cupcake to save my life. It was like such a connection.
Yeah.
And so I realized that every single one of us is born with the instinctive ability to manage our eating effortlessly. We cry when we're hungry. We pull away when we're done. And although we don't maybe know anything about nutrition, we know enough to survive and thrive. So it's the parents' job to figure out what they're going to feed their children. But ultimately, it's the child's job to figure out when they're going to eat and when they're going to stop eating. And if we could stop getting in the way of that, I think our next generation would be a lot better off. Too late for some of us. So if you are struggling with food, you have to remember that you have an inside out way to make your decisions about your eating. All of this outside in stuff about good food and bad food and what you should eat and shouldn't eat just distracts us. Pause for a minute. Check inside. Am I actually hungry? Does my body need food? Is my fuel tank low? How do I know that? What am I feeling? How hungry am I? Do I need a little bit of food or more than that? If I only need a little bit of food, could I wait until a more convenient time to eat or to sit down with my family? If I'm really hungry, let me remember that doesn't mean I need a lot of food. When I'm really hungry, it means I need to eat soon. That's important because we make that mistake, right? I'm really hungry, so I double the amount I eat. No, no, no. If I'm really hungry, I need to eat soon. And then the other piece of that is recognizing when I'm satiated, when I'm full, paying enough attention during the meal, trying not to get so engaged in TV or scrolling your phone that you don't even notice when the fuel tank is full, that you say, oh, wait, I think I've had enough here. I can tell that my body is becoming satiated. And the entire process of eating about actually tasting the food, because so many people are thinking about food all day long, except while they're eating it. And then they're thinking about something else or doing something else. So instead of really bringing their enjoyment and their experience to the food, they're watching TV or scrolling the internet or reading or doing something else. And so they get to the end of the meal and they don't even remember eating it. It wasn't that pleasurable. So they eat a little more. I think, there's just this inside out approach that we can take that helps us move away from going back on and off diets over and over again to a place where we're really in charge of our decisions.
I agree with that 100%. And that's why you are on the Someday Life podcast, because it is about kind of the inside out look. It's about unlocking your brain and changing your mindset and rewiring your mentality. Um, and just what you're doing is so awesome to kind of flip this whole narrative on its head. Be like, wait a minute, are we doing this right? Because like you said, a lot of us, including myself, we have, it's almost like you've been trained for so long. We almost have blinders on when it comes to food and, you know, being fat, being skinny, being healthy. And you see, like in social media, right? All these yo-yo diets, these, like keto is a big thing right now. Like the last 2 or 3 years, I've been hit up like 13 times from people telling me I need to do a keto diet. You know, what are your thoughts on, do you have a thought on that, or an opinion on the keto diet? Is that something that, because a lot of my listeners, and you know, they're into exercise and fitness and, you know, bettering their lives and things like that. And the keto diet is something they feel like it's kind of like the next best thing. I know it's been around for a little while. It's just kind of a modified diet to this point.
You know, so here's the thing. I've been doing this work for 21 years, and I was dieting myself for nearly 20 years before that. So I've been around, and I remember when Atkins was a thing, Zone was a thing, Weight Watchers was a thing. Now it's WW with Jenny Craig, and you know, there's been one parade of diets after another. And I don't have anything to say about keto, because the truth of the matter is, Justin, that in 3 more years, it's going to be something completely different. There is research out there that would question whether or not that's an appropriate thing, but that's not my job. My job is not to tell you what to eat. My job is to help you start to look beyond rules and instructions and start to learn to listen to and trust yourself, because you have the ability to know when your body needs fuel, and you also have the ability to know when your body needs other things. Now, look, honestly, an athlete, they need to know certain things about nutrition. They may need to skew towards certain types of foods. They may need additional information. If a person has diabetes, there are things they need to know about nutrition that will be very beneficial. I'm not saying that nutrition isn't important, and I'm not saying that you instinctively know what you should feed your body. What I'm saying is that if we're going to break out of this 100-year pattern, because it's been more than my lifetime that this has been going on, we have to start to begin to revert back to the days when our bodies were the leader and we could trust ourselves, especially now that there's so much outside influence. If we can't learn how to listen to and trust ourselves, then we're going to spend all of our energy chasing the next diet, the next diet, the next diet. I was teaching one of the things I love to do is retreats and workshops. And I was teaching this workshop in a retirement community. And the third or fourth week, this woman, she's a lovely, like 70, mid 70s lady. All of a sudden, she slams her hands down on the table and she stands up and she leans toward me and she said, "Why didn't anybody tell me this 50 years ago? I have spent the last 50 years of my life on one diet after another. When I'm eating what I love, I feel guilty. When I'm eating what I'm supposed to, I feel deprived. I cannot believe how much of my life I have given away." And so, however old you are, however long you have been doing this, please know that you can just keep going on the next diet after the next diet after the next diet. Or you can say, "This is madness, and I'm not doing that anymore. I want to learn how to listen to and trust my body and learn how to make decisions for myself. So if I want a cupcake, I have a damn cupcake. And if I feel like having roasted broccoli for dinner, I have roasted broccoli for dinner." And so on and so forth, that we are making decisions from an inside out place, and stop thinking that some expert who's making a quick buck on on our insecurities about our decisions is smarter than we are. They're not. They don't have the answers. You do. You just need to learn how to listen. And I can help with that.
That's awesome. So that's a good, tell people how can they find you? How can they get help from you and your training and your mindful eating programs and things like that?
Thank you. So our website, not surprisingly, is amihungry.com.
Not I'm hungry. It is.
No.
Am I hungry?
I've tried to get that URL because you're not the only one who's made that mistake, but it's amihungry.com. On that very first landing page, that first home page, you're going to find several free resources, including the first chapter of my book, Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat. That first chapter will give you some structure. You and I, Justin, I've loved this conversation because it's been so real. It's the kind of conversation I have over a glass of wine at a party back in the day when we used to have a glass of wine at a party, right? Like it was at the old days. But it's really covered, I think, a lot of the questions that people have. If you're ready for an answer, download that first chapter for free. You'll learn about the mindful eating cycle and the 6 decisions that we make about eating multiple times every day, and it'll give you a model. Once you see that model, you will have a much better idea whether this is right for you or not. If you're not ready for it, if you just want to try one more diet or stick to, keto for another 3 months or whatever, that's fine. Whatever you want to do is fine. But if anything I've said has resonated for you, if anything I've said has made you think, wait a minute, that happened to me, or I've seen that, I get that, that kind of makes sense, please read the chapter and decide for yourself. Is this something that might actually have the ability to transform your relationship with food? And Justin, I didn't say it earlier, but here's why. My passion, like yours, I think, my passion is to help people live the big, vibrant life they crave. And in my experience, as long as people think that they've got to change their eating, change their body before they have permission to do that, they're just putting it off. And so what I want people to do is find a much more effective, natural way to manage their eating and free up all that energy they're spending obsessing about eating and not eating, so that they can go use it to take care of their families, to work on their careers, to have a little fun, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, because it is, what did I tell you earlier when we spoke a couple weeks ago? I said it's like a necessary evil.
Oh, and that broke my heart.
I know, you're like,
with
like,
my
I
book
said the
title,
wrong words.
Yeah, eat what you love, love what you eat. I don't think eating is a necessary evil. I don't even know if I mentioned this to you, Justin, but my husband is a professional chef. And here in Arizona, my parents own 3 Mexican restaurants. So hearing that eating is a necessary evil just breaks my heart. I want people to eat what they love. Yes. And love what they eat, but as importantly, to then use the other energy that they've been wasting on all this to do what they love and love what they do. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for coming on the podcast. It's so cool. It's so refreshing to hear a different perspective. I wasn't anticipating this before, we connected and stuff. I wasn't really sure. I did my research, like I said, on you, and I was like, this is different. This is what I like. It's not the norm. Like I said earlier, you're flipping the narrative on its head. And I think this is, for me, I instantly I felt like a lot of weight's been off my shoulders. Like I've always been, like health conscious and like always trying to, I kind of like higher protein, mid carbs, like try not to eat as much processed stuff. But I've always, since I was a younger kid, I've always carried weight. And then when I finally got older and started like working out and exercising, kind of having a different, it just changed my body that way. But mentally, as I think millions of people they have very similar battles in their own head with food. It's this love-hate relationship. It's this guilt, you know, and then it kind of, there's some depression that kind of comes with it, you know. And I feel like you have the answers to a lot of these things, and what you're practicing now and what your passion is to constantly be working towards this, right? And to provide solutions to people to look at this thing differently and to adopt more of a mindful eating approach versus, you know, like
mindful, F-U-L-L, eating.
Mindful, yeah. Like this take and give, this tug of war. That's what I think about with food in general mostly, is I think most people think this. It's just this tug of war thing. It's this balance that you can never quite, it's this teeter-totter effect that you can never get it quite equaled out. Emotionally, something happens, right? And exactly, that's what you're saying. Is like, hey, it doesn't have to be that. Like, that's kind of the problem, is the fact that you're trying to do that.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right. Eating isn't a math problem. It's something that when you were an infant, you knew how to do. You knew how to eat the right amount for your body size, your body type, your enjoyment of food. Not everybody likes food the same. Some people just eat to live, and that's fine for them. I love food. I want food to be part of my life in an enjoyable way. And I wanted to stop ruining every meal with guilt, because that's exactly what was happening. And I think that you're a really good representative example of how many of us have had this struggle, this love-hate relationship with food. And I guess I'm just here today, Justin, so that you and the many people like you, like I was, can understand that there is another way to think about food, and that you can, you know, when you're ready, that there is another way to relate to food that doesn't require all this time and energy and angst.
Mm-hmm. Before I let you go, Michelle, is there a place where might get a lot of questions from this episode? Is there a place that people can communicate with you on those questions? Or, I mean, do you have like an open forum like that, or like a blog or something like that they can, I mean, I guess the website, but.
Yeah. I mean, our website has a blog and articles and all kinds of information. I mean, it has a great search engine on it. So if you go to the little magnifying glass on the website, pretty much you can ask just about any question. And I'm pretty sure that an article will show up, because I've been writing for 20 years.
Yes.
I also do have a Facebook page, just Facebook, Am I Hungry? And I'm happy to answer questions there. I do retreats. We have an emotional eating and binge eating retreat coming up. I have a support community for people who really want to heal their relationship with food. And, you know, and I think, like I said before, I think that chapter 1 of the book, which you'll find at amihungry.com, I think that's going to answer a lot of questions. People are going to want to know, how do you do this? How do you get started? And exactly what is going on here. And I think that chapter will answer a lot of those questions.
That's awesome. Well, guys, you heard Michelle. Go check out the website. Great information. I don't want you to, it's so hard when we have, you know, an hour and 15 minutes, and we're trying to kind of cram everything in there. So go out there, answer your questions, your curiosities. I can say personally, in the 2 weeks that I've known Michelle, I have adapted the mindset, asking myself, am I hungry? In fact, I have my middle-aged son who's 9. He tends to he overeats, you know, or he's eating when he's not hungry. And so I've been asking him, like, hey buddy, are you hungry? And then he pauses, and I can see it just switch like that. And he'll say, no, Dad, I'm not that hungry. I was like, okay, well, let's just wait for a little bit. Let's have some water or something like that. Or, hey, you know, have you got your homework done? Like, I try to instantly change his mind a little bit. And
maybe find something fun to do, because that might be what he's really looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because the kids always want to have something. So
eating, doing homework. I don't know, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Michelle May, everybody. Michelle, thank you once again for coming on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Justin. Thank you. Let's go live that someday life today.